you're going to be here for the full 90 minutes. So I'll just do a quick introduction of Brittany. Brittany is a director at High Street Consulting, where she helps lead a team that specializes in performance-based planning and programming for state DOTs and metropolitan planning organizations. She has 9 years of experience in the industry, and she helps transportation agencies measure the expected benefits of planned transportation projects to track and advance the long-term attainment. So with that, Brittany?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for being here. I was a little nervous when I saw the other two presenters weren't able to make it, so I'm really grateful you're here. I'm assuming you like bikes. I'm assuming that's why you showed up. And I am really excited about just getting to share this with you, because I think this is one of the coolest projects I've had an opportunity to work on too. Pull it up into presentation mode. And oh, before I begin, I wanted to put a plug in for our quarterly newsletter. You can receive this by joining our Google group. So AED 80 has a quarterly newsletter. It's a roundup of happenings in transportation visualization. We recently did a makeover of the newsletter, so it's looking a little more polished. So please go ahead and take a snapshot of the group there, and once you join, you'll just be signed up for that newsletter. You can also unsubscribe it at any time. So I'll give some background about what is this statewide bicycle network, what was the development process for doing some data visualization around it, and the purpose for the tool. And then we'll have some time to, hopefully the internet will cooperate and everything will work out there, and we'll do a demo. And then we'll have some time for questions. So I didn't initially have this slide, and then I was talking to someone last night over a drink, and he was like, why would there be an 8,000-mile bike network? I'm so confused. So I thought I'd give some background. The state legislature of Texas, actually, this is their brainchild. They decided that they were going to mandate that TxDOT implement a statewide bicycle network. And the intent behind it is more tourism driven. It's to showcase the landscape, the parks, the amenities in Texas, and hopefully to attract cyclists from around the world, showcase Texas communities, boost economic development. It's also to provide Texans with recreational and travel opportunities, and perhaps an alternate route to work. So in 2018, there was an initial study that was done by Texas DOT along with Jacobs Consulting. And they did a lot of outreach to community groups, cyclist advocacy groups throughout the state to try to narrow down where they might begin, what an example bike network might look like. And this is what they came up with. It hits a lot of the national parks and state parks within the state, as well as historic points of interest, and also hits major urban areas. So at this point, this is where we came in and got to contribute towards kind of nudging this along. So an 8,000-mile bicycle network requires a lot of support from a lot of different planners, well over 100. Where do they start? How can they communicate? This will be built out incrementally, of course. I'm hoping, by the end of my lifetime, there will be an 8,000-mile bicycle network in Texas. But it's already begun, and it's already there's already existing lanes, bike lanes, separated use paths that are part of this, and trying to make connections there and continue to develop forward. So we did take a data-supported approach to providing insight to folks as to where they might want to look next for development. And so here are some of the data sources that were available to kind of supporting decision making for where you might want to focus. And documenting crashes was a big one. So wanting to look at where are there cyclist crashes currently. Roadway attributes. Something interesting about the network, of course, because of its size, it's not entirely, there's a mix of locally owned roads, there's a mix of state-owned roads, there is some portion that are also on the national highway system. So there's a mix of information available, but especially on state-owned roads, which are, higher speed, a little bit higher traffic stress, we tried to have as much information as we could. So we're looking at things like outside shoulder width, lane width, intersection density, speed limit, ADT, percent truck ADT. We also look at actual speeds where we can, where that information is available. We use Strava data as well, average daily bike traffic. Strava is now free, for those of you who don't know, so that is fantastic. It's out there for you to use. Planned roadway projects in the area. This was a big one of wanting to see where is work already being done and how can we build off of that momentum to try to include a cycling component to projects that are already happening. Proximity to state and national parks as well. Proximity to retail. It was a big concern in the stakeholder groups that we did that people did not want to be out cycling in the desert alone. They wanted to make sure that there would be stores available. Also, we had equity considerations. The Justice 40 initiative wasn't out at the time that we were assembling this quite, but we did use zero-car households and low-income households as well from census data. So that's a lot of data and how to make sense of it. So I put a plug in here of kind of like why visualize, and this is a really famous example. You might be familiar with it, but I wanted to share an example of 4 data sets, X and Y points, and they have some summary statistics. So a lot of times when we're working with this data, something you can do and should do initially is kind of look at, where are the higher traffic stress areas? What do those look like? Just running stats on some of your roadway points. And that's a good thing to do. And something that I would infer from these 4 data sets that I picked out is that they're very similar. They have about the same mean for Y and exactly the same mean for their X points. There's a high level of correlation between X and Y. Their linear regression line is about the same. So I'm thinking, okay, these are, there's a lot of similarity here. But when we visualize them, these are actually the 4 data sets. This is called Anscombe's quartet. It's a common example of kind of pitching why you should take the time to visualize your data. And so you can see in the top left, the data set fits a linear regression model really well. The one on the top right, there's a relationship between X and Y, but it's not linear. And then the 2 on the bottom, there's outliers there that can't really be explained easily by modeling. And in fact, I would probably, if I was looking at this and it was a real data set I was testing, I might check to see if there's some error or some issue. So I really like that example. Is just kind of definitely, run some descriptive statistics about your data, but also take a look at it. And so that's what we wanted to give planners an opportunity to do with statistics about this bicycle network, is to really kind of get in there and just take a look at what's happening, even at kind of an intersection level, to get quite granular. I did want to mention too, we also did do some accessibility considerations for the tool as we developed it. I really like this slide. As transportation people, we tend to do traffic light colors, red, yellow, green, and this helps me see very clearly that red and green are quite possibly the worst possible color combination you can do for color blindness, and it is fairly common. So something we tried to keep in mind, and also we tried to, with the tool that we developed, not rely on color to have everything and the map linked to a table below. I have the pleasure of working with the Federal Highway Administration, and through that work have found some great resources as well for accessibility. Section 508.gov has a really nice layout where they talk through resources and accessibility for different types of documents and deliverables that you might be doing, spreadsheets, PDFs, presentations. So just wanted to put that out there as a resource for you all. So back to the bike network. What we did through our approach is we essentially overlaid the data sets. It was all spatial data, so we put them all into the same coordinate reference system. And then from there, joined it to the example bicycle network, and then calculated some descriptive statistics about each segment. It was a big process to segment the network. We were going in and kind of looking at trying to do breaks at an intersection level. We kept them at around 2 miles in length. We didn't want to have segments that would be so long that it wouldn't be a feasible project for a planner to actually create and deliver on. So that was the intent behind the sizing. And then we have a set of criteria. I'll go through a little bit how we arrived at some of the criteria that we did, but the planner is able to weight the criteria within the tool. It comes with default weights, though, that came out of some stakeholder workshops, so defaults to that. Our general development process for the tool. So we worked to have some back and forth with expected users, talking through, we just had really like stick figure type drawings of kind of iterating on what do you want to be able to do in this tool, what kind of functionality would you expect, and so tried to have that figured out prior to developing it to save time, and that was really helpful. And then delivered a prototype tool. This was developed through a combination of Python Flask and R Shiny. It is packaged in a Docker container. If you're not familiar with Docker containers, the intent behind them is they essentially kind of freeze a tool in time. And so the great thing about open source resources like R and Python is that there's a really diverse ecosystem and lots of libraries are being updated all the time. That's also a challenge to them because they become outdated and then they become a bit of a burden to maintain. And so when you put them in a Docker container, you're never going to get a pop-up that's like XY77 user on GitHub stopped supporting this library. It will just always be there. So there's interest in moving this tool over to an Esri-based platform from Texas DOT to provide a bit more of a stable environment that's just more consistent with some of their other tools. So we are looking at that as well. The benefit of doing the initial prototype in R and Python was just the speed of being able to do prototyping in it. So that's what we went with there. So we held some workshops with planning agencies throughout Texas and did just some listening sessions to what they felt was most important about developing the network out. And safety was definitely a big one, connectivity and accessibility, economic development, tourism benefits, and then also project readiness, being able to actually just get it built was a sentiment that we heard a lot, was like make sure that we can make some practical steps forward. We ended up having 3 scenarios for planners to choose from. We typically don't do this. We typically will have like a path forward for like a single consistent score for network screening. But because the nature of this network is such that it's not really top down, it's more wanting to make sure that there's ownership kind of at the regional level to move forward with it. And also, something we heard was that the political climate can change quite a bit in Texas and regarding sentiment towards cycling. And so right now there's a big push on safety and making sure that there's, low level of traffic stress. But if attitude were to change towards wanting what they called a signature segment, and this would be more something that could be more recreational, quality of life benefit, could be perhaps used for commuting as well, was the thought there. Low-hanging fruit is a focus on overlap to planned projects, and so being able to add scope to those. So I'll try to bring the tool up. If not, I have slides we can walk through. So we start here with a pop-up, and you can download the user guide directly from the tool. And so you start by selecting your district. We'll try going to Austin, Texas. And then you select which prioritization scenario you want to focus on. We'll stick with low-hanging fruit. It defaults to having the kind of in orange here is the bicycle route, and then in green is the overlapping planned construction projects. And where a user would start with this is going to the segment score weighting. And so it defaults to the priorities that came out of the stakeholder groups, but can also be changed. And then your scenario, your weighting scenario can be saved and named. And this allows other planners to kind of see what other people are doing. They like that idea that there was some collaboration there. And then the UTP, Unified Transportation Plan, is the 10-year construction work plan for TxDOT. And we have a lot of filters here where you can look at specific types of projects by letting year, if you want to really focus on, say, what's happening in the next 4 years, so you can really try to screen to make sure you're not missing an opportunity. Then we have project classification. The project's default, or the segment's default, to being prioritized as a higher priority if there is a bridge project. And the rationale behind that was that might be another 30 years before there's a major renovation to the bridge, and so that might be your one chance to really prevent things like the chokehold that comes when you're suddenly needing to merge into traffic. And so you can come down into a pretty granular level and explore what's going on with each segment, if it would be eliminating a barrier. And then the segment that you select will link to the table. If you click on the specific segment at the table, it will link and take you to where that is up here, and then you can download and save your information. The segment scores will also reset map. The segment scores are the raw values. We do normalize these into a final score value, but it goes against what our keynote speaker said today. But they found the normalized values to be confusing. They were like, what does a 0.71 mean? Can you just tell me the value? So they found this to be a little bit more intuitive, wanting to know, specifically when is the next opportunity for when an overlapping project is. What exactly is the estimated cost? The estimated cost we came up with by using a unit cost. It was an analysis of historic bike projects. So we just took kind of a per mile cost of, in the past, what has a shared use path cost on a statewide average, what has a buffered bike lane cost. So trying to separate them out that way. And then they do have route types as well. They have, it's kind of like a functional class, a rudimentary functional class system that was developed for the cycling networks. Cross-state spines are the ones that would be connecting major destinations or major urban hubs together. Regional spurs would be like a regional loop. And then they have regional routes, which are kind of smaller, connecting in urban areas. Let's see. The last thing I did want to mention too is that users are allowed to upload their own, say they aren't really loving the suggested route that was developed through the kind of the statewide process, they can upload their own line work. So we have some instructions and a template for how to create a shapefile and the different information that would be required to run this analysis. So this has a SQL database behind it. The data sources that we mentioned earlier are there and can be updated by Texas DOT. And then they will run on uploaded line work that's not specifically on the map that you see here. And so that was really popular, to be able to do kind of an exploration of, well, if I wanted to do a different route, what might that look like in terms of level of traffic stress, or what projects might be overlapping there. And with that, I will open it up to any questions.
You mentioned that uploaded data now. Is that stored and maintained per user, or is that added to the overall database?
So people can snoop on that. So if you if you upload something, the statewide planning was interested in what routes they might be considering. There is a feature within the tool that I don't personally have access to right now, but kind of up here where there's this bell, users can send a notification to statewide planning and say, hey, I really like this alternative route. I think we're going to go forward with it. And then the statewide office can then say okay and kind of replace the line work in the main example default file.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, moderator, but I do have a question. So when you went back, the low-hanging fruit, there was a note that said not designed to the TTS, design, update to be. What does that message mean?
Yeah, when the initial bike study was done, doing an example network, not all of the suggested routes met certain criteria that they were looking for. I forget exactly what the standards were, but it was related to the outside shoulder width. Certainly cyclists are not separated from traffic. Typically a narrow shoulder, a higher speed limit as well, and a higher level of ADT was kind of what that would indicate. And so if that segment has already been flagged as kind of a higher risk, that's one that would be a good candidate for some work to separate cyclists from traffic, or at least create a higher space. They did do some exploration as well into, we were talking before the session about kind of levels of I guess risk or comfort. I guess comfort would be a better word, that different cyclists have, and they can be grouped into how confident they are on the road and how comfortable. And a lot of the major cross-state spines, where we're talking about 100 miles going in between areas, it is expected that those would be more confident cyclists, but we still don't want them on the shoulder of a highway. We want something a little more there. Then we were talking to about kind of the regional routes in more urban centers, where if you've seen kind of the pictures of different levels of cyclists and their confidence, I would be the one with the small children around me. And so the regional routes, those are the ones where we're targeting a family could potentially go to and feel comfortable there. Go ahead.
So following up on the question on sort of the low-hanging fruit, coming from your perspective, perhaps, so apologies for my ignorance on that. What is the low-hanging fruit here? Is it the potential of new bicycle users? Is that sort of the low-hanging fruit, or is it just the safety? And I would see that the motion would be one of the important objectives here. I don't know. So just kind of trying to understand that, and also when we look at the low-hanging fruit number of bicycle users, or?
It's less exciting. It's just where we felt that the low-hanging fruit is like a step that could be forward to actually getting the routes built. And so there's already some investment happening on those segments. And so we're going to say, okay, we'll review the investments that are already happening, the work that's already being done, and how can we tweak or enhance that so that it can be more comfortable for the cyclists going through. Go ahead, Matt.
You mentioned that this is being used at sort of regional level or with maybe local agencies or so forth. Are you aware of like sort of how to test that, share this with people? Did they kind of talk or put something together that kind of helps them understand the different weighting criteria and how to adjust those and what these different things meant? It seems like you have a distributed user base, and obviously it's a relatively straightforward tool, but there's probably some nuance there that might require some training or something like that. Was that part of the rollout, as far as you know?
The process was me talking to them.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did have training. We had 3 different sessions. We initially were going to have kind of one and see how it went, and it was kind of like deer in the headlights look of like, this is a lot. So we had kind of turned it onto, let's let you all do some poking around in the tool, see how it goes for you. We said, why don't you try uploading some segments yourself, and we'll watch you, and we'll be around if you have any questions. Why don't you, change some of the weighting in there and see how that goes. And so that was really helpful. I think both for them as users and for us as the developers of the tool.
So I'm coming, so AASHTO and the Adventure Cycling Association have a partnership. I'm not sure if it's the National Corridor Plan for bike routes that go across the country.
Yeah.
So we're trying to connect cities, right? And
Yeah.
have, not get at the micro level of bike routes within a city, but just how do you connect Washington, D.C. with Baltimore and have sort of a route that does that.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for this one is, at the onset, you had the picture of Texas and trying to connect cities, right? Austin, I'm not doing like Texas geography, with another city. And then you get down at the macro level. And then you get down to the sort of what I would say the micro or the granular level. Say, okay, within Austin, there could be multiple, bike lanes and everything on various facilities that are parallel with each other. So is the goal of the tool to identify bike, infrastructure within the city at the micro level, as well as then trying to connect cities with each other at more of a macro level within the state?
It is, yeah. That is the intent, is to allow planners to both look kind of at it, like the intersection level in urban areas and see, what would be the, a good way to try to get traffic through that is perhaps commuting as well as kind of on a longer route. And then also just how do we get from Dallas down to Austin is kind of a consideration. We did have one corridor up that goes through Lubbock that is intending to connect to the larger national bikeway planned networks. So that was a consideration as well. And then trying to strategically think, when it goes up into Oklahoma, there is a connection there that can be made, and it doesn't just end. So, yeah, good question. Yeah, go ahead.
What percentage of these bikeways actually exist versus, or in some form or another, versus ones that are intended to be created? And is there a way to visualize the difference in the platform already, or like kind of rank the quality of existing ones that might need to be upgraded?
Yeah, so there is. It's a little outdated, so it's going to require some maintenance and legwork, I think. But in 2018, when the study was initially done, they did classify the kind of what's already there and what is it. Are cyclists separated from traffic, yes or no? And what infrastructure is there? What is the width of the path that they are traveling on? Things like that. When I looked about a year ago, it was like 38%. So it does partly exist already. But still quite some ways to go. And the biggest focus, I think, in terms of the gap is that inner city connection. Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of just a curiosity, but for those long cross-state sections between major cities, when it's creating the suggested path, does it prioritize just going in a straight line and getting the shortest distance, or would it prioritize like hitting small cities that could be rest stops for the cyclists? Like would it bend a certain way if it would cross through a small town and then continue on, as opposed to just passing it up and getting right back on the main line?
The intent when the routes were being planned is to kind of meander a little bit, to not take someone like 100 miles through the desert, but to kind of hit some smaller towns and local communities. That's what was kind of done just pragmatically to help cyclists, feel like they have access to, necessities as they're going through. But it was also part of the goal, part of when this was born, I think, was to showcase Texas and showcase the communities. I'll try to bring up an example too. But they kind of meander around things like a reservoir and a park and things like that. Yeah.
So is Strava data available visualization-wise, or is that just feeding into the model?
That's a good question. So we've reached our limit with our Shiny and what it can display, partly because of the size of Texas. So I mentioned earlier there is some interest in bringing this into an Esri platform, and we were just kind of rapid prototyping at this point. And so there would be more capacity there. There was interest in seeing all the data sets, but especially crashes. And just sadly, the volume of crashes it was not going to work on this platform. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was just wondering about, and this ties in with the Strava data, types of users you're anticipating for all these, versus recreational versus commuters, and then like average speeds on all the segments, especially in like the more urban areas.
Yeah, the expected users for, I kind of mentioned this earlier, the tolerance that we're expecting cyclists to have on some of the more cross-state spine routes, connective to different towns and areas. We're expecting that tolerance for stress would be a bit higher on those routes, and then quite a bit lower in some of the more urban, regional and spur routes. That might be somewhere where a local family might want to be bringing their kids for a Monday night bike ride, versus a more intense cyclist who's trying to check off his bucket list, like I biked through Texas. So we do have average speed for anything that's on the state network, and we also have speed limit for the whole network. The regional spurs, it varies by kind of the functional classes that we invented for the different routes, but kind of the regional spurs are around like 30 mile per hour is kind of what we were targeting. And then it does actually go up to like 55, 60 miles per hour in some of those. And so that's where we're seeing some of the, we disconnected. But that's where we're seeing some of the scores spike because there is a really high traffic stress. Any other questions? Oh, wow.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed it. Question that I have is, how do you evaluate the pedestrian and bicycle level of service?
Yeah, I'll bring up the slide that had the data sources. Where is it? The list under the roadway and traffic characteristics. It's a composite score of that. There's a formula that we got from that Minnesota DOT was using that we adapted, which I do not have memorized, but it takes a composite of these different attributes: percent truck, ADT, speed limit, lane width, intersection density. That one we had to calculate ourselves. That was an intensive side quest.
So the speed of like the bicyclists themselves, not vehicles?
Not the cyclists. We're looking at speed of the cars on the road.
Okay. And that determines the level of service for the bicyclists.
Yeah, level of traffic stress. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned one of the challenges in realizing this vision, and maybe a reason it might take 10, 20, 30 years, being like a large number of jurisdictions that would have to work together to ultimately implement this. Have you seen, kind of as you've been presenting the tool, like, has it been helpful in kind of getting the right people in the room and getting some of this conversation started, especially among folks who might not be used to working together already?
Yeah, I think it really, it's a cool thing to get excited about, right? I found that people are generally pretty interested in wanting to make something that's, it's kind of like sparks your imagination, like, oh, an 8,000-mile bike network across our state. And we're the second biggest state. I also work with Alaska, and they get fussy if Texas appears slightly as big as them. But yeah, I found that having a way to, like a platform to communicate between planners has been really helpful. And it also, the statewide planning office is also using it a little bit in a way to leverage, like, well, this district has been, really looking towards ways that they can incorporate some of these elements into their, existing projects and see what they've been doing. So it kind of also gives a platform for having some examples as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering about the kind of geospatial network data behind this. Does Texas have a bicycle asset inventory that you built on, or did you have to kind of do this yourself? How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they do have, on the state network, they do have facility inventory. They have a classification of if it's a shared use path, if it's a bike lane, if it's a bike lane that's separated from traffic. So we do have that level of information. The local networks, we do not, and that's been a struggle. The 2018 study that I mentioned, it did go through, and it was like a pretty intensive, like they were using satellite imagery and things like that. They did compile local regional information. It's patchy. So that was quite a project, and that is not currently being maintained or updated. So that would require another source of fund and investment to maintain that.
Brittany, not to keep you up there all the time, so thank you. It was an excellent presentation. Thanks for answering questions, and everyone for joining us. And feel free to wander off to another presentation, or stay here and keep talking.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending, and thanks for your engagement. Really appreciate it.
But I was taking notes. I wasn't texting my friends. I was taking notes. I was taking notes because I was supposed to provide some information about this actually. So, question is this possible? Is to get where you can put bicycles into projects. Is there to make it verse so that you can say this transportation project should move forward as the benefits of including bicyclists and pedestrians? Like, is that used as an evaluation factor?
For this tool, it's intended to do that. They do have criteria about involved in the contract,
Yeah.
but they do have criteria specific, not part of the tool.
Okay.
Because they market more, to encourage.
doesn't